same
want
page.
megawatts. I want megawatts for everyone, for you, for me. Okay. And if we're going to have that, we have to have energy abundance.
Do you see that coming from nuclear?
Honestly, nuclear has to be part of that solution. I think that an advanced civilization is built on nuclear.
Steve, your company Celestial Mining focuses on off-grid opportunities utilizing America's abundant and clean natural gas. Take us through your process for mining the Bitcoin, who you partner with, et cetera.
Sure. Well, we partner with local operators where we're able to find talented people who are aligned with our values and who are able to provide us the energy at the rates that we desire. So we have some constraints and a kind of a box that we look at. I want to always be in the bottom half or the bottom quartile in terms of our production cost, because Bitcoin is a volatile commodity. And as we produce it, we want to be in the most defensible position. And so there are a lot of people, just like in metals or mining and other places, where if you have a lifting cost on your or a cost to get your gold out of the ground, there's prices at which you're just going to shut down the mine and not operate. It's the same in Bitcoin mining. And so given the volatility, you want as low an energy cost as possible. And so that's part of what drives our decision. But there are other things that we look at, including the consistency of the power. We do have assets on natural gas, and that's a very attractive opportunity. It generally has very low costs in terms of the base energy cost, but there are also challenges in operating and spinning up those operations and also operating at scale. So when you're looking at how much can I deploy, you want to know how much can I deploy in a given location. Or if it's a set of oil wells, what's the drive time between all these sites? And, do I have a single group that can staff this or not? So there's a lot of interesting things to look at. And we do have on-grid assets as well in other states where we have deployments. So we've got 3 or 4 locations. Actually, we just added a 5th location. And most of them are in the Alabama, Texas area, and we have some assets in North Dakota as well.
So on your website, you talk about placing a strong focus on energy abundance. Would you speak into that for us?
Absolutely. I think that human society and human flourishing is really correlated with our ability to capture and utilize energy. That is what drives prosperity at the base. Base production is things like food, and food is energy. It's energy for our bodies, humans, okay? But energy for transportation, for doing work to replace the labor work, so we're not all working with our muscles. A human being can only output 200 watts sustained. If you get on a bicycle and pedal and measure that, that's not very much, right? And so our world today requires energy. And if you want to think of a vastly more prosperous future for humanity, what would that look like? Well, it would look like, your car puts out maybe 50 kilowatts, right? Or 30 kilowatts in the engine. We think in horsepower, but kilowatts, all right? It translates to kilowatts. What would it take to have a flying car? Well, a lot more than 30 kilowatts, most likely. Okay. So if we're all going to have flying cars and be able to travel 1,500 miles on a pop, now there may be forces and reasons why we won't want those things, but I don't know what your vision of a more prosperous humanity would be, but that was kind of what we were sold when I was young. And where's my
talking about
car?
The cartoons?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I want megawatts. I want megawatts for everyone, for you, for me. Okay. And if we're going to have that, we have to have energy abundance.
Do you see that coming from nuclear?
Honestly, nuclear has to be part of that solution. I think that an advanced civilization is built on nuclear, that hydrocarbons are a miracle. they're fantastic because they're portable. You can carry megawatts around in a bucket. Okay, that's like nuts, right? It's so easy. And it's hard to do that with many other sources, but the density in the amount of output that you get from nuclear is just unbeatable. Mm-hmm. And I think once we get over the fear that has been, and propaganda against nuclear power, we could open up a great deal of prosperity by developing further.
That's outstanding. Well, Steve, we've heard about income being denominated in Bitcoin. How can one produce income denominated in Bitcoin?
Well, that's how I got into mining, actually. I was looking for cash flow in Bitcoin. I said, if Bitcoin's going to be the future and we're really going to have businesses doing with Bitcoin, I said, what would be a Bitcoin business today? And I look around and I could build a software product or something like that and try to tempt people who have Bitcoin to give me their Bitcoin. But since most of the price growth of Bitcoin, I think, is still ahead, it's really hard to get people to part with Bitcoin. So if you're trying to build a product to sell people and get their Bitcoin, it's tricky. So the best one is probably the exchange market, where people buy and sell Bitcoin. You think of companies like Coinbase, River, Swan, and all of these operators that sell Bitcoin. They can take commissions essentially on what they're selling and call that a Bitcoin income stream. But I looked to mining because it was the only place you could generate substantial cash flows that are denominated in Bitcoin. And that is why I went down this road several years ago, and why we have turned it into a commercial venture.
So in your analysis, how can Bitcoin be an inflation hedge if it sells off when stocks sell off?
Yeah, that's what you hear that a lot from people, that well, inflation went up and Bitcoin went down, and what does that mean? So is it really an inflation hedge? And I would say in the short term, it's not. So prices could go up substantially while Bitcoin doesn't respond. But if you look at over the longer term, it's obviously giving you more purchasing power over time. So one big problem is people's sort of high time preference, short horizon thinking, right? And if preservation of immediate purchasing power is essential to you, so I tell people, probably if you need this money in the next year, that's probably not money you should be putting into Bitcoin. All right. I mean, if you're going to need it to pay your mortgage next month, that's not money you should be putting into Bitcoin. But if you can have a longer time horizon, a longer view, there is absolutely a case for as an inflation hedge. And specifically, if you understand the roots of the inflation, which is the expansion of the monetary supply and the necessity to support the debt system, you want to have an equity asset like this that is likely to outperform most or all others.
So, Steve, given the goal of establishing Bitcoin as a currency, how do you anticipate the Federal Reserve reacting to this potential competition with the US dollar? And if Bitcoin were to gain widespread adoption as a currency, in your analysis, what steps might the Federal Reserve take to protect the dominance of the US dollar?
Well, I don't come from the view that money is what the government tells us it is. Money is what people choose to use as money. And the dollar is a product. The dollar is a product of the government and the central banks that organize, or the banks that kind of created the Federal Reserve. And so as a system, it's a product, and it will live or die according to its usefulness. And its usefulness may extend far beyond what some of the doom and gloom people think. But that said, there's a long way to go between people aren't just going to stop using the dollar one day and start using something else. It's a long transition. I would rather be a transition to Bitcoin than a trying to transition to some centrally planned thing of the, whatever the
Being like a
power
CB,
you
like
want
a
to replace it with.
CBDC or something.
Yeah, or yes, exactly. Some IMF thing or what, who knows? Okay.
Right.
So my guess, though, is that the utility of Bitcoin is going to grow, and that it's going to grow even to politicians and to bankers at
We're
some
seeing
point.
that now. I mean, even Trump the other day was, I
Uh,
don't know where he was at, but I think he was paying with Bitcoin.
he paid for with Bitcoin at one of the bars in New York where they have a regular Bitcoin meetup. And what's interesting is that the transaction he did, I think it went through right between 4:45 and 4:47, which he is the president 45 and
That could not have
47.
been planned, right? That's a coincidence.
Synchronicity.
That's interesting.
But I was at the Bitcoin 2024 conference in Nashville, just feet from the stage where President Trump and RFK Jr. both announced their plans for a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And I'm cautiously optimistic about that. There's also some challenges that come with the federal government desiring to get its hands on Bitcoin. Just like,
This could be their way.
it could be. Yeah, right now, the only Bitcoin they have is Bitcoin that they've taken in confiscation, right? And so they need to establish a track record, a new way of getting Bitcoin that doesn't involve seizing it. So we'll see on that. But ultimately, I believe that there's a lot of interesting stuff to do at the intersection of bonds and Bitcoin. If you think that the money supply is going to expand substantially, or that we're going to have sustained high inflation, then long-term borrowing becomes difficult and problematic. It's hard to say what you're going to end up with at the end of the maturity date. So there's a lot that bond issuers or borrowers could do to potentially sweeten or protect their lenders by incorporating Bitcoin. And I think ultimately, in the case that the U.S. federal government has a lot of Bitcoin and also needs to sell bonds as they continue to adjust this through this period, there's a great likelihood that they would incorporate some Bitcoin aspects into the bonds.
So, okay. So given, I'm going to shift us here. Given recent major cyber outages like the CrowdStrike outage and warnings from the World Economic Forum that massive cyber attacks are coming, what would be the impact of a major global cyber attack on Bitcoin's functionality? Would that render it unusable for extended periods?
Well, there's different ways of using Bitcoin. So by holding Bitcoin, you're using it, so to speak. Okay, you're using it to store value, right? But your ability to transact on Bitcoin really depends on access to the internet. You need to be able to get a message out on the network. Okay, and so you couldn't really move or spend your Bitcoin unless you're able to get online and do so. And so if there were some cyber event that took down your internet access, that would be a problem. Okay, it would be a problem until you could restore your access. And you could do that by waiting or going somewhere else where access is working. So it's very unlikely that you would have an event that was truly global in nature that took down the internet everywhere. I think the internet is almost synonymous with civilization at this point. And so it's like electricity. If the electricity's out, you either wait it out for somebody to fix it, or you go somewhere that has electricity.
I don't know if you heard, and I'm not looking to bring up, some tail event like this, but Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum has been on record saying that there's going to be a cyber attack between now and 2030 that's going to make the pandemic outcome look like child's play?
Well, this is a theme, and actually, I try to avoid as tantalizing it is as it is to think about all these edge cases, problem scenarios,
That's what
black
it
swans,
is.
and all of it.
It's an edge case for sure.
I love to think about that stuff, but it's also kind of depressing if you're really over focused on it, and you can blow things out of proportion. But there are some recent movies that try to kind of socialize the possibility of an event like this. I was referred to one recently, alone. What was it called? The film I'm talking about, All
I'm not
Alone.
sure.
Anyway, there was a recent film.
Okay.
I got a chance to check it out because I was like, okay, this is the kind of normie introduction to end of the world scenarios or whatever. And, it had all the Teslas crashing into each other through remote control of some kind, nobody had access to the GPS. Yeah, this is the cyber idea, the idea that you're going to get shut out. It's possible. An event like this could be used as a cover to potentially reboot the banking system.
Absolutely.
So they really, really, really needed to introduce something and save the system. They could just say, "Oh, big cyber attack. That's why the banks are all closed right now."
I agree.
Bitcoin would probably keep on ticking just fine, and your gold is going to stay just fine in the safe. And so those are things that I'm not too worried about.
Well, let's move over to the ETF. So, Steve, the recent introduction of Bitcoin ETFs, has institutional ownership of Bitcoin since then increased significantly, or is it still primarily held by retail investors? And in your analysis, why would you expect greater institutional adoption in the years ahead?
Well, part of it is that they're just slow. There's a lot of things that institutions have to do to hold Bitcoin. And to be fair, most of them don't actually hold Bitcoin. They hold Bitcoin IOUs. So they have Bitcoin exposure, market exposure. And that begs some further questions. But as long as we're looking at Bitcoin treasuries, we see MicroStrategy is in the first place with 220 or 240,000 Bitcoin, some very large number like this. They're close. That's the federal government has 180,000 Bitcoin. Chinese have about 170,000 Bitcoin. These are large holdings. BlackRock has a very large number of Bitcoin. But that Bitcoin is held on behalf of the investors in the fund, in their ETF. So they really benefited. There was another fund or a trust that owned, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust owned about 600,000 Bitcoin. A bunch of that just moved over to these ETF providers. A lot of new money has come in, but there's some speculation that this was people who may have already owned Bitcoin and just wanted to shift their exposure into IRAs and other things that they could do using these vehicles, as opposed to holding the Bitcoin outside of a tax-advantaged account. So I don't really have the breakdown on all of that. It's clear that we do have some market, some growth in new market participation, but there was a lot of just Bitcoin moving around and changing hands and how it's held, in terms of what's happened since the beginning of the year.
Is there a particular event or catalyst that you believe could trigger a mass shift towards sound money among the general public?
Oh boy, maybe. I shudder to think about what would really cause that. We look at Argentina, for example. There is growing awareness of sound money there because they have kind of gotten sick after 100 years of socialist, communist type thinking. They've just used it all up. They elected Milei. He's come in, he's cut the government, stabilized the currency, brought it to what is it called? A balanced budget even, which is, was something that was utterly unthinkable before.
Yeah.
So there's a point or a data point about a threshold of what it might take to bring a society to embrace these ideas. He's out there expounding upon sound money, pointing all the young people to the right books. And so they're going to educate a new generation. And if the results are good, I think that has a bright future there. We could do the same, but I'm not sure what it would take to bring us to that point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fair point. So it's a fair point. So Steve, I heard in a video you had shared, you were doing a presentation and you had shared about Bitcoin altering daily spending habits, lifestyle choices, just being a positive influence on those things.
Yes.
Would you share some of those with us?
Sure. It's a deep topic related to time preference. So, but it's based on the general observation that a lot of people get into Bitcoin and then they clean up their lives in a lot of ways that seem to have absolutely no connection to Bitcoin. Like, what does my diet have to do with Bitcoin? I don't, but there is sort of a suite of related things, and I think it plays well into some of the themes like Make America Healthy Again that are kind of flying around in the orbit. And but ultimately, it comes down to lowering your time preference and understanding the time value of money. So in the fiat system, the continual pressure of inflation and the continual expansion of the money supply shortens our horizon, our time, our ability to think long term. It increases our time preference. So we would prefer to have satisfaction sooner rather than later. And we take lots of trivial pleasures. There's a lot of things that go on that we complain about and that manifest as what some people would say is social decay or decline. Right? A general decline of morality, decline of this or that. This is what you're talking about. So, but it comes down to individual decision making and individual daily economic choices. And when you contact an asset like Bitcoin or gold for that matter, that retains value over time, that increases your faith and ability to in the future, in your ability to provide for the future. Then you kind of reorient your behavior. And you can kind of see in American society, our inflation hasn't been that bad. It's been relatively mild in developed countries. But if you look at some of the other countries where inflation is really out of control, you can see in high relief the changes in behavior that are driving. And so you could kind of back into our own situation and look and say, oh, I see what's going on here. It's a little bit like that, just not as extreme.
This has been a wonderful conversation. And before we wrap up here, and I ask Steve our final question, I want to point everyone over to our Substack. It is free. Go to metalsandminers.substack.com. We post free content on the consumer economy, markets, artificial intelligence, individual metals and miners, and all the expert interviews that we conduct, just like this one. They're all up there. And when you subscribe, we want to give you a free gift. It's a report that we wrote, and it's based on the important Ray Dalio foundational premise. It's titled, If You Don't Own Gold, You Know Neither History Nor Economics. This free gift, it's a must-read for everyone on why we all should own gold. So head over to metalsandminers.substack.com, put in your email address to subscribe, and receive the free gift on us. Also, I'm positive that you've enjoyed the conversation with Steve as much as I have. Please let him know. Hit the like and subscribe button and leave a comment below the video. It's now time for our Golden Nugget segment, which is sponsored by the Naples Family Office Symposium, and where Steve is going to be a featured speaker at. It'll be held this year on October 3rd and 4th. The Naples Symposium is focused on uniting family offices, wealth managers, and other sophisticated investors through leading experts adept at navigating today's intricate market dynamics. So go check out the Naples Symposium. The link is pinned in the comments section. Steve, let's discuss portfolio positioning. Understanding that you're not a financial advisor, and based on all we've discussed today, with your experience and your worldview as your backdrop, how are you positioning for the next 12 months? What assets do you like? What assets do you want to stay away from? And what percentage of your portfolio are you recommending to folks to hold in sound money assets?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's always appropriate when we are talking with investors. I think that it is very reasonable for people to have a sizable bucket for sound money, and I think that metals play a role in that. I think that Bitcoin plays a role in that. The allocation to Bitcoin really ought to be proportionate to the understanding that you have. So most people are really just beginning to understand it or just getting their feet wet and probably shouldn't own too much of it. Okay, so there is some reasonable allocation, and I'm not going to give you a hard figure for as a recommendation from myself, but you find that the investment advisors who are able to talk about Bitcoin, and that's not all of them, certainly, but those of them that are able to talk about it will recommend in that 1 to 10% range for their clients. And that, again, depends on how much they understand. And many people will probably think about rebalancing. So, for example, if what we expect comes to pass in a number of in the next 12 to 18 months, you may find you're up on that position. And if you're kind of heavy weighted, maybe you're not comfortable holding the same holdings, you might rebalance into other assets. And I've said, if you're going to rebalance and you don't want to get out of the sound money bucket, that what you rebalance into is to gold, or you might look at real estate or other things that are scarce, that are valuable. Some may be cash flow producing, some may not. So we have that in common with gold. But over the next 12 months or so, I naturally, because of my business and what I focus on, I'm focused on the Bitcoin, and I have to be, because it's not just an investment for us, it's also a driver of our profits in our operating business.
Of course. And just to conclude this part, is there any assets that for you personally you think stay away from these?
Well,
at this point in time?
Yeah. So there are a lot of products out there that want to ride on Bitcoin's coattails. Bitcoin is the thing. There are a lot of scams out there, and there's interesting projects, but an interesting project is not necessarily a good investment. If you want Bitcoin-like returns, you need Bitcoin. If you want to speculate on the greater fool, you can have fun with that stuff. Okay. So what I would encourage you to do is not get distracted. As you look into this space, there are people who are trying to utilize the prestige of Bitcoin and the success record of Bitcoin to try and pitch you something else. And so just be wary. Most of that stuff actually declines in terms of its price relative to Bitcoin. And most of it goes to zero. So you want to watch out for that stuff.
So, Steve, thank you for coming on to Metals and Miners and for being so generous with your time and your analysis and ideas. It's been wonderful to spend the time with you. Would you please share with the viewers any important message you want to leave with those tuning in, where they can learn more about your work and how they can connect with you?
Absolutely. I would just say that I think Bitcoin is here to help us. Okay, it doesn't need you or me individually, but it is a force of change in our world, and it's something to be optimistic about. And I think that honestly, there's a lot of other things that are bringing a lot of challenge to us right now. So it's good to have things that bring you optimism and hope for the future. And I would just say that if you want to keep in touch with me, or follow what I'm doing, you go to my website, celestialmgt.com. That's my company, Celestial Mining Management. We also put out a letter on Substack, and I think, Gary, you're going to have my Twitter linked on the show notes.
I'm going to have the website up there. I'm going to have the Twitter link. It'll be up there permanently on the bottom thread. You'll see the links in the description area. You guys can click through. Go check them out, follow them, start to get educated, learn. It's important. Bitcoin is here to stay. Steve is a very good representative of Bitcoin. He's in the mining space. He's a wealth of information, and I'm sure he'd be happy to connect with you and answer any individual questions that you have that were not asked and answered today. So I look forward to having you back on sometime in the future, Steve. Thank you for being here with us. And everybody else, thank you for watching.
Thank you so much, Gary. Great pleasure.
I want to point everyone over to our Substack. It is free. Go to metalsandminers.substack.com. We post free content on the consumer, economy, markets, artificial intelligence, individual metals and miners, and all the expert interviews that we conduct, just like this one. They're all up there. And when you subscribe, we want to give you a free gift. It's a report that we wrote, and it's based on the important Ray Dalio foundational premise. It's titled, "If You Don't Own Gold, You Know Neither History Nor Economics." This free gift, it's a must-read for everyone on why we all should own gold. So head over to metalsandminers.substack.com, put in your email address to subscribe, and receive the free gift on us.